This could now be the beginning of the end of urethane bowling balls. There has been a very interesting announcement that I think really does signal where bowling is now heading. And it seems to be heading into a world where traditional urethane, or indeed slow absorbing oil balls, which is now the term that seems to be used, will not be a part of the game. So what is this announcement? Well, that's what I'm going to discuss in this video. And the announcement comes from the Malaysian Tenpin Bowling Congress. And they have just announced a major rule change. They have stated that slow oil absorbing high performance urethane bowling balls are now not allowed in all tournaments hosted by the Malaysian Tenpin Bowling Congress, and it's a decision that takes effect immediately. This ruling applies to all sanctioned competitions across the country. Now, according to the announcement from the Congress, there was a lot of discussions and reviews that took place, and they gave an insight into what prompted them to make this drastic change. The main concern was that slow oil absorbing balls can alter lane conditions more quickly than intended, which then affects the fairness for players who use a range of different styles and equipment. But they also had concerns related to governing the equipment and also enforcing those rules as well. They felt that the changes you see in urethane balls over a period of time can make it difficult to keep a control over the balls that are being used and to make sure that everything is above board. They added that they will continue to monitor this situation and will review it again in the future. Now, you're probably watching this and thinking, well, this is happening in Malaysia, why should I care about that? Here's why. I think this is a very interesting thing to analyse, because I think that this really does signal where we are heading in bowling. And what's most interesting about it to me is that up till now, we've had organisations come forward, like the European Federation, and they brought in the 78 hardness rule, which they did retract. Obviously, the PBA brought in the 78 hardness rule. Then most recently, we've had the usbc, who have made various rules about when slow oil absorbing balls can be used in certain competitions. But to actually have a federation from a country just come out and actually ban urethane, or as they put it, ban slow oil absorbing equipment, is very interesting to me. Up until now, the rules that have been brought in have been more focused on restrictions rather than bans. When you look at the usbc, there were a couple of tournaments that they banned slow oil absorbing balls, but on the whole, their rules were focused around the 78 hardness rule, just like the PBA. But it always felt like this was just a stepping stone, and that the 78 hardness rule and the usbc restrictions really felt like a test phase to start to see how these rules were received by the bowling community, how they actually worked in practice, whether they made a big difference to competition. But I think always the end goal for some of these organisations has been to put an end to urethane. And I think that a lot of them have been going through the process step by step rather than coming out and doing an outright ban. I think that always the first step for them was to say, okay, well, you know what, we've tried some restrictions, we've tried a partial ban, it still hasn't worked. Now we have to go to a full ban. I think if the usbc had come out and simply banned urethane completely, you just open yourself up to much more of a backlash. But now it does feel like there's a genuine test here to see how these different rules work in different competitions, different styles of play, etc. And then a decision can be made. Now, obviously, I have no evidence to say that the usbc or the PBA are definitely planning to ban urethane completely in the future. It's just my observation. I just think that's where it's heading in general. Not anything to do with one particular organisation. I just think across the board, worldwide, it seems to be that is where bowling is going to go. And this announcement that's come from Malaysia really does indicate that that is the case. Now, the big question is, how many other countries will follow suit? And if they do, will they come out now and start to implement the same kind of ban? I think it's definitely possible. And the reason I wanted to highlight this is this decision and announcement, it does open the door. It could create a bit of a catalyst where some of the other countries in Asia follow suit, and then suddenly other countries around the world look on, see how effective it is, see whether it's working, and then think, well, and then start to think that they want to introduce the same kind of ban. And again, you might be thinking that this is happening in a completely another place of the world. It won't ever happen where you are, but these things do change very, very quickly. And I think 2026 seems to be a testing year, if that makes sense. I really think that particularly the USBC are going to be monitoring their new rules very, very closely and seeing what kind of an impact they have. And then I really do think we could get a decision on some more restrictions and potentially an outright ban of slow oil absorbing balls towards the end of 2026. This whole situation is fascinating when you actually break it down, because you ask the question of how did we get to this point? And the answer is it was one ball, the purple hammer. Yes, the pitch black is an excellent ball. It came before the purple. It was really, really well received. You know, before that you had the Storm Natural, which saw a couple of PBA players win titles with it in 2009. That really, I think, started to open people's eyes to how urethane could be used. And then obviously it prompted Storm to then develop the pitch black, which again turned out to be a fantastic ball that did dominate the urethane market. But of course, what really caused the explosion was the purple hammer. I think it's safe to say that if the purple hammer never existed, we wouldn't even be talking about this now. But isn't that absolutely remarkable how one bowling ball can cause all of this? And it just goes to show what an amazing job Hammer has done. You know, the fact that nobody has been able to recreate it in the same way. But like I said, I think that now this is the turning point. I really think some other countries in Asia will now start to follow suit, and I do think this is going to spread. And I think in a year or two, maybe if urethane does get banned, we can look back and we can point to this moment that was the catalyst for speeding up to get us to the point where urethane is now no more. But there is one interesting scenario that could actually happen. Now, let's say that Malaysia is the odd one out. Let's say they are one of the only countries to come out and ban urethane. And the rest of the countries, they just carry on, you know, using urethane. Maybe they adopt the 78 hardness rule. But on the whole, you can still use urethane in most of the other countries. Well, what will happen then to the Malaysian bowlers who have to then compete against players from other countries? You know, maybe they go to different countries. How strict would the Malaysian Congress be on their players actually using urethane? It just makes me wonder. I wonder if they would say, well, okay, it's not an event sanctioned by us, but we don't want you to use urethane, or whether they would allow their players to use urethane when they're coming over and playing in other parts of the world. Would they be at a disadvantage having not used urethane for most of their tournaments that they play? I don't know. Or would it be an advantage to them to then open up other parts to their game to learn to use reactive bowling balls a little bit more for those players who rely heavily on urethane? I think it swings and roundabouts, but it's an interesting point. I do wonder how it will affect the players. It could be a positive thing for them in the sense of they would have to now learn how to bowl without urethane, which, like I said, for some players, that's all they know. That's just the environment they've been brought up in, that they've used urethane majority of the time simply because it works. And a lot of the time, that's all you really seem to need to use, especially for the high rev two-handed guys. Urethane is just a good option for them. So it will be interesting to see how the players in Malaysia develop and adapt to this new rule change. But I'm very interested to hear your thoughts on this, whether you agree with me that this could be a catalyst that sees slow oil absorbing balls banned for good, or whether you think urethane will carry on throughout most of the bowling world. Let me know all of your thoughts in the comment section below. Well, that is going to do it from me for today. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and if you have, I'd really appreciate it if you would hit the subscribe button below. Well, that is going to do it from me for today, and as always, thank you bowling fans, and see you all next time.